Let's speak now to journalist and broadcaster Candice Holdsworth and writer and podcaster Lewis Oakley, who are on our panel this morning.
Morning. Good morning.
Candice, this caught my eye this morning. This is in the Times, actually, in fact, it's in many of the papers this morning, talking about reform and the possibility of them winning the next election. According to this, Labour is very nervous. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I find this so fascinating. I think it shows how much the mood has shifted in the country. Things have sort of taken a rightward shift. I mean, you've even seen it with Labour, so they're hoping to capture the conversation on immigration, for instance. I mean, they realise that they need to be a lot tougher than they have been. I mean, look at that big speech Keir Starmer did after the ONS figures came out. Suddenly they started sounding like old Labour. I couldn't believe it. I mean, you could not imagine that 8 years ago. You can see in the US that things have changed completely. One thing I noticed just before Trump was elected, there wasn't the same hysteria that there was maybe 8 years before he was elected. And I wondered why that was. And I thought, actually, after he was elected, I thought it's because things have changed. And maybe the same sort of tides of change are coming here as well.
Well, it's because they also let in around 11 million people through the southern border in the period that Trump got voted out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what impacts Trump has on where Labour shift to. I mean, back to the question on reform, I don't see it just because it's a numbers game. If you think of the last election versus the election before, Labour pretty much stayed flat. They actually lost a few votes. It was the right-wing split of the Conservatives and Reform, and that split isn't going anywhere. So unless they do a coalition or one of them gives in, I don't see where the numbers are going to come from. I know that they want to do a more... Because Reform got more votes in the last election than Lib Dems, right? But Lib Dems just play a better game of really getting the seats. So I know that Farage was saying he was looking at that. So let's see what happens with that. But I don't see in our system how that will happen.
Yeah. I think it depends, doesn't it, on whether the Tories can get their traditional voters back.
Yes.
Because so many have swung to Reform now.
I don't think they can.
You don't think they can?
Because I think the problem was it was never about what the Tories were saying, it was their delivery. It was 14 years of saying things that the opposite was then happening. So I think the trust is gone. So if you're going to go into an election where you say, look, guys, trust me this time, honestly, I mean it now, I just don't see how that's going to swing anything.
But... I mean, the Labour Party just keep giving gifts to Nigel Farage and Reform at the moment. I mean, we had the farmers' protest, didn't we, on the 19th of November, which Nigel Farage was there amongst the people in his greens. I mean, looking very much part of the action.
I know.
And then we also had that speech that you just referenced there, Candice, from Sir Keir Starmer this week. Migration not even mentioned. I mean, a glaring omission. And then straight away, Reform and Nigel Farage come out and say, well, we're the only party with an answer.
Yes.
It seems as though Labour, if they are scared, they're not doing anything about it.
Well, I mean, 5 months in and already their approval ratings have just tanked. And I mean, people have pointed to different things. They've said that there's a lot of chaos internally in Labour. Or is it because actually Labour's policies with the general population aren't that popular? You know, they got into power because of that split on the right in our electoral system, and Labour were massively rewarded by that. You get the Lib Dems who know how to play the system. They've been playing it for years. And I think that it is true in our current system, this split on the right is going to hamper the parties unless, of course, you see a total collapse in the Labour vote. And Reform is second in a lot of Labour constituencies. And those are the constituencies that tend to be the most conservative on immigration. So you have to see the way that goes in the next election.
The Welsh elections will be really interesting to see because Reform... I mean, could take many seats.
Yes.
And let's see what, if Elon does give Nigel some cash, maybe that changes the game a little bit.
£100 million war chest through Twitter. Reform, of course, polled ahead of Labour for the first time in that new poll. So Nigel will say they are going after Labour voters, not Tory voters, in the red wall seats. And if this poll is converted into an election, if it was done today, I think the split it would be a hung parliament. But you'd probably see a Labour-Lib Dem coalition as a result of that. So there's still some work to do for them. Trump and France from Jamie, you said, what is it with this bromance between Trump and Macron? They're very touchy and smiley. More to the point, why is our PM not there? That's what I said as well. Even Zelensky will be there for the event. Do you think Starmer's kind of missed a trick there? Because he's not, of course, met President-elect Trump since he won election in November.
Yeah. Well, it has officially been confirmed that President-elect Donald Trump is going to hold a meeting with Prince William ahead of the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral a little bit later on today. Trump has landed in Paris, where he will attend a ceremony as well as meet numerous global heads of state, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yes. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden pardoned his son Hunter, quite controversially, earlier this week, and he was awaiting sentencing, Hunter, later this month in 2 federal cases focused on gun ownership and non-payment of taxes.
Well, President Biden has repeatedly said that he wouldn't issue a pardon. So why the change of heart? Well, joining us now to talk through the pardon and much more besides is journalist and author Nelson Aspin. Good to see you as always, Nelson. Should we start, before we get into Hunter Biden, should we start in Paris and that breaking news this morning that Prince William is going to meet President-elect Trump in the city? I'm sure Trump will be really looking forward to that because we know how much he loves the British royal family.
Well, that's exactly right, Ellie, especially the prince's late grandmother, the Queen. Donald Trump has admitted just how besotted he was in the presence of the late, great Queen Elizabeth II. And so it's a terrific homecoming for Donald Trump in a way. I'm sure he's really looking forward to meeting the prince and, of course, being around the other world leaders and sort of reveling in his return to the top job. And he will certainly be front and center of all of this. I'm just hoping that the U.S. commentators are finally going to learn to pronounce Notre Dame and instead of saying Notre Dame. It really gets my school French lessons up in a hackle.
Is this quite significant in terms of, as I just said, Nelson, that our own Prime Minister's not met President-elect Trump yet? But he's meeting Prince William. He's met Emmanuel Macron. What do you make of that from your side of the pond? Do you think that the UK is maybe missing a trick when it comes to getting in there with your incoming president?
Yes, I think so. I mean, everybody is going to have to sort of come around, and we're going to have President Trump in the office for 4 years. So everybody's going to have to come around, like President Macron, like Justin Trudeau. We've seen everybody sort of come to attention. They've accepted the fact that Mr. Trump will be the president. So everybody's sort of moving in line accordingly. It's going to be fun to watch today.
Nelson, should we talk about President Joe Biden, the biggest story of this week, pardoning his son Hunter Biden after previously saying that he would never do so? What was the change of heart about?
I'm a pretty cool customer, but it is the hypocrisy of this that makes my blood boil. And that is, it's the nature of the game. There's hypocrisy everywhere. But for President Biden to stare the American people in the face for the last year and say repeatedly, insistently, without any waffling, that he would not pardon his son. And then all of a sudden he goes and pardons his son. And I would point out that he didn't just pardon him and save him, from these current problems, but he made the pardons go back 11 years. So it protects any future clashes for Hunter. He's off the hook, as are a lot of alleged business dealings, nefarious actions that could possibly implicate other members of the Biden family, including the president himself. So it was rather sweeping, and president's getting criticism from both sides of the aisle, left and right. His mouthpiece, his press spokesperson, finally came out and told reporters that the president really wrestled with this, and you can't deny the fact that a father will do anything to protect his son, but it is the hypocrisy of this. And I have my own sort of theory that they believed Kamala Harris would win, and then she could have pardoned Hunter. And then it would have been this sort of very magnanimous, gracious gesture, and everybody would have benefited from that. Even Trump himself floated the idea that if he were to win, which of course he did, that he would consider pardoning Hunter. So the bottom line is Dad saved the day for the prince.
OK, Nelson, tell us about this. Well, it was on your doorstep, actually, in New York, the shooting of the CEO of this healthcare company in the US, I think the biggest healthcare insurance company in the States. What happened there? Have they found the suspect?
No. In fact, the New York Police Department has said that the suspect, they believe, has left New York City and was spotted going into a bus station in Upper Manhattan and is probably now out of the city. They know that he took a bus into the city 10 days before the execution on the streets of Midtown Manhattan, right in the morning commute. There's a lot of controversy about this. How did it happen? Was it a targeted attempt? The police believe it was. And there was a closed-circuit video of him holding had a backpack on, and they found the backpack yesterday abandoned in Central Park. I mean, it's amazing. You can't leave anything on the street without it being taken away. It's amazing that backpack was in the park for 3 days and that nobody found it sooner. But they have found it. There's DNA evidence. They caught a glimpse of his face on camera in a youth hostel, which is right around the corner for me. I walk by it every day. It's terrifying to think that this all happened there. But they have one sort of clear shot of him when he was flirting with a receptionist at the youth hostel. So using facial recognition, they hope to find him soon. But the citywide hunt has now become a nationwide hunt.
Oh, gosh. Well, Nelson, I hope he's found soon. Let's talk about something totally different, shall we? Because there's been a fascination with Barron Trump's accent. And it all started with this viral clip of Barron when he was probably 3 or 4 years old. Let's just remind ourselves of that clip.
I like my suitcase. I have to go to school now.
Yeah, you will have lunch and then you go to school.
Now I'm gonna go.
Yeah, first you will have lunch and then you go to school.
Now you can do reading, writing, and arithmetic.
And I love that because it's a thick Slovenian accent, which shows, and you said it yourself, Nelson, it is a sign that Melania raised him by herself pretty much because he's got that wonderful Slovenian accent. But there's now been this fascination about what he sounds like now, Nelson, and we've had this fantastic clip which has resurfaced from the general election. Let's just have a little listen to that.
Hello, how are you?
I'm in the business.
It's very nice to see you. Very nice.
I gave him a
How are you?
shot.
It's very nice. Good to see you. You too, buddy.
And Nelson, he sounds like a really softer version of his father, I thought. What did you make of it?
I think it's brilliant. I mean, here he is. He's 18 years old. He's a young college student, 6'9". I mean, he's a giant, thrust into the international spotlight as he has been. And what's most remarkable about that, aside from having lost the Slovenian accent, is his manners. It is so refreshing in this day and age to see a young person, not only well-dressed, but polite, a gentleman. He's a young gentleman. So if that's part of Melania's influence, then good on her as well. And she came out in a new interview saying that Donald Trump really has Barron to thank for sort of the surge of the youth vote that helped put him back in office, and that it was Barron's ideas about podcasts and streamers and these alternative forms of campaigning for his father to take on away from the more traditional TV, radio, and print outlets, and that Barron really was an integral part of his father's re-election success.
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, even Eric Trump I met a few weeks ago, again, for the second time. Very polite, even off camera, very generous with his time, very polite, very courteous, but wants to make sure you're okay and your staff and camera people are okay. So I think he's raised a good bunch of kids there, Donald Trump. Nelson, thank you very much for being with us this morning. We'll catch up again next week. And stay safe on the streets of New York.
Yes, thanks, Nelson. Always good to see you. I love those clips of Barron Trump. I think he was really, really polite. I mean, in that last clip there, if you didn't quite catch it, he says, really lovely to see you again.
Yeah. Eric was saying to me a few weeks back, he said Donald, their father, always said to them, no drink, no drugs, no smoking, and just be a nice person, be polite, be generous.
And no tattoos on that list, apparently.
Oh, really? No tattoos?
Yeah,
he didn't mention it, but I can imagine
And he'd say it to them every night before bed and make them promise. Funny, isn't it?